Number 5. The Alkimos. The SS Alkimos was built as an American ship for use in World War II. It was sold to Norway, which used it for weapons transport during the war. In 1944, a radio operator who worked on the ship, Matti Steen, was killed by one of the crew, who then shot himself. Norway covered up the incident and claimed that she was killed by enemy fire. After the war, the ship was sold to a Greek shipping company. Strange unexplained accidents kept happening with the ship. In 1963, it crashed into a reef off the coast of Australia. It was towed to Fremantle for repairs, but while it was there, the Alkimos caught fire and had to be towed to Hong Kong for more work. It had barely left Fremantle when the tow line snapped and it ran aground. The tow company couldn't get it unstuck, so they left a caretaker on board until something could be done. The caretaker experienced many strange things on board, including feelings of anger, knocking, footsteps, and voices. Over the years, a few companies tried to salvage the ship, but each time someone tried, bad things would happen to their crew. Eventually, it was abandoned and began slowly sinking into the water, where it can still be seen today.
Number 4. Man in the Attic. In Colmar, France, a young woman experienced something strange in the summer of 1991. Her family had just moved into a new house, and she found a hole in the wall of the attic. Through the hole, she could see another room, but as far as she could tell, it had no door. She felt something strange coming from the hole but didn't investigate. Later, she went back with a flashlight and saw something. There was a young man sitting on the floor, his knees against his chest. His arms were crossed on his knees, like he was hugging himself. He turned his head toward us and smiled. We bolted out of the room and went to the storage room. My heart was pounding, I was out of breath. I first thought that it was a real person, but he had no color. It was like a 3D dark shadow. And we never heard any footstep. My friend refused to admit that we saw a ghost and we never talked about it. My grandmother learned later that our house was a clandestine printing office during World War II. The owners printed slogans against the Germans. But I think that there was something else in that house. I believe that the secrets room was used to hide people.
Number 3. Missing children. This story comes from Reddit user. Their grandfather was a member of the British Army and was stationed in a remote village in the Swiss Alps during the winter of 1943. The village quickly got snowed in, and all the telephone lines were out. The roads were blocked, and the whole battalion was just stuck in the Swiss Alps for the entire winter. Most of the villagers only spoke German, and most of the troops only spoke English. So when the troops were out at a local bar one night and a man began yelling, "Where take you the children?" at them, they were pretty confused. They rounded up a translator and took the man back to the base, where he told them that, since their arrival, several small objects had gone missing. A tarp, some wood, an axe-like weapon called a halberd. And then the children started disappearing. If it had just been one child, they probably would have written it off as a weird or tragic accident. They were, after all, stuck in the mountains, surrounded by snow and wild animals. But 3 kids? That was weird. Reddit user writes, the captain told the villagers that he would continue to look into the matter and that he would begin sending some of his men to patrol the streets each night looking for whoever or whatever was the culprit behind all the strange thefts and abductions. Later that night, Private Reginald disappeared from the barracks. Disappearing children was one thing, but a grown man? It seemed unlikely that an animal, even a wolf, could have taken down a healthy full-grown man on its own. Naturally, rumors began to surface that there was some sort of monster living in the mountains that came down at night to feast on the occupants of the village. So they keep doing nightly patrols. One night, the grandfather and a few other soldiers see a person standing outside the windows of a darkened house, peering into it. They shout for the figure to stay put. Instead, it takes off running. They gave chase. Eventually, it jumped into a hidden cave and began shooting at them. They returned fire, and when the shooting stopped, they investigated. They found Reginald in the cave, dead, surrounded by 7 half-eaten children.
Number 2. Ghost planes. After World War II ended, many people saw ghost planes. These fighter jets would appear in the sky, then disappear without a trace. One scary story takes place a year after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States Army picked up an incoming plane on their radar. They sent a few pilots out to investigate, and when they came back, the pilots said that they had seen an American warplane, a P-40, to be exact, that looked like it had been through hell. It was covered with bullet holes, the landing gear was missing, and the pilot was bloody. Then, the plane just crashed. Dropped right out of the sky. When they went to investigate the crash site, they found the plane, but no pilot.
Number 1. Ghosts of Normandy. One father took a trip through France with his family. He wanted to visit Normandy and see a few sights from World War II. His daughter was 7 years old at the time, and he says that she had, at that point, never been exposed to any history about World War II and didn't know what either side's uniforms looked like. After they returned home, things got a little odd. He writes, "Over the past year, my daughter has often spoke of things or men that she saw looking at her, pointing guns at her, and following her while we were in the bunkers and around the Normandy area. She often described them as crouching down, hiding behind corners, holding guns and looking as if they were very mad." He started asking her questions about what she saw. Here's one conversation he had. "Were you scared?" "Yes, but I knew they weren't trying to hurt me. So I didn't think anything of it, but there were a lot of them. Everywhere I looked. They were moving around, like army men do. Kind of crawling, but bent over. When we would walk out of a bunker, I would see one in the grass or behind a tree. Then when I was in the car, I could see them looking at me from behind a fence in a field. Sometimes a lot of them, sometimes only one or two." She also described their uniforms perfectly, camouflage and everything.